Hi, Raquel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much for coming on and joining me today. I'm really excited to talk about all sorts of things with you, but particularly design because I know that this is your field, your speciality, and I know you've got a great passion about it. And I know that you've got a business, and of course, you've done some incredible stuff for us inside the HMO roadmap, so our members will know you and recognize you from some of the amazing courses that you've done. And we're going to talk about your brand new workshop in there as well soon. But Raquel, we always like to start by asking our guests to introduce themselves and tell our audience a little bit about themselves. So, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're doing in property, and how the HMO stuff and where that's all come from as well?
Yeah. So I'm Raquel. I'm an architect and interior designer. I'm the founder of Mardesign, and I have more than 15 years of experience in hospitality, gaming, and high-end residential. I kind of say that I like to design quality spaces that work and feel better. And by kind of having this commercial mindset, I know how in any type of property, how to maximize the property's ROI and kind of make it work better and achieve higher rents, decrease voids, increase rentals, all of that thing, which I absolutely love. And I think it comes back to or ties in with my background. I moved to China after uni. So I'm Portuguese, and I decided that, I wanted to be out and about in the world. So why not move to Asia? And have a complete culture shock, which was brilliant. And there I worked in various projects, mainly hospitality and gaming, that kind of gave me a different way of looking into design, because the main motto was if there's a way to make money, the investors would invest more money into that. And I always had that in kind of the background of my head. And when I moved then after 8 years of living in China to the UK, I then started working. My first big project was the Four Seasons Hotel just behind Tower Hill in London. And it was like a 300 key and 40 SA unit. So like big one, also on a grade listed 2 building. So any problems that you think that might occur on site,
You've
like
dealt with them.
it happened, but it gave me a huge awareness of how to deal with various subcontractors, contractors, with developers, with hotel operators, with engineers, like all sorts. And with that experience that I then gained, I kind of thought, well, maybe I can use the experience that I had in working in large scale projects, but start to work with smaller developers in smaller projects, and then helping them maximize as well their property's performance in terms of design, or using design as a platform. And that was how I kind of then came across this whole like HMO, SA sector, conversions from commercial to resi. And so far, yeah, I started the business last March. I have a few very, very good clients which I've done HMOs with, and I'm now going to do their second HMO. So it's really exciting. And I just absolutely love it. I love to see a project that is literally an old smelly house transform into something that it's amazing in terms of how it looks, but also how it functions, the circulation, the correct sizes of rooms, the communal spaces, and how you can actually do that with an affordable design. So you don't have to go absolutely crazy to do that.
So, I mean, you obviously have a huge wealth of experience in, I suppose, the design and architectural sector, and then across the world, so globally, and also in different types of buildings. So, I think it's really special to be able to talk to you, or someone of your caliber of experience, about interior design. And one thing that really resonated with me when we started talking, and you've mentioned it already briefly, but when I thought about design, I appreciated design for what it was and the impact that it could have on our brand and our ability to let things quickly. But I'd never actually thought about it commercially in terms of how much can we increase the rent by, how can we adjust the ROI on this project by investing a certain amount into to the design. What is actually the spending, or the spending over a term, or the saving over a term by doing a design in a particular way. Whereas before we prioritized it, but we didn't really prioritize it in that way.
Yeah.
We just prioritized it in a sense that we wanted it to look good and maybe better than some of the competitors, but we didn't understand from a commercial point of view. And I've learned already from you, and with the content that you've created for the roadmap for us, that that is actually a huge part of it, and actually should drive projects. And it makes so much sense now and seems so obvious in retrospect, but it's been really interesting to hear you talk about that and learn that from you. I suppose the first big question I've got for you though, Raquel, is you've worked on the Four Seasons, you've done things in industries like gaming, which must be so interesting. And I suppose I always think we're a bit weird. We like these old, dirty, smelly houses. um, but and what is it about the HMOs and the essays and that sort of stuff that has attracted you? Because it must be so exciting, and it must be a real privilege to work on buildings like that. But what is it about this? Is it because it fits better with your business and personal objectives, or is it just a different type of project you enjoy doing?
Well, I guess it's a bit of both because I've done, as you said, like large projects. But when you do large projects, what happens normally is that there's like this overall look as if you're like just like a bird's eye over the project. And then you actually zone in into several bits of the project. So like, for instance, one designer gets one thing, the other one gets another, and then we come all together in some sort of way and it works. But when you're dealing with smaller scale projects, you actually have control from the concept until it's ready for, your photo shoot and your marketing materials. And when I say you have control in a way that you develop the concept. So the idea behind whatever you're designing. And in parallel, you do all the planning and all the technical drawings. And by having these two things together, you can then deliver a really set of quality, consistent drawings and technical information to your builder, which then will allow, in terms of you as an investor, will allow two main things. One is to have an accurate cost of refurb so that, obviously there's always some surprise, something, so there needs to be a contingency for that. But you kind of know exactly the numbers you need to work towards if you want to implement a certain design. And then the other thing is that by having that and giving that to a builder, they will be able to know exactly what you want to do, know the vision, and coordinate themselves and avoid costly mistakes. And when you do this in big projects, you cannot have control of this in this way, because obviously it has to be a huge team, many subcontractors, many subconsultants. And it's just a different way of working. And for me, it's really exciting to see like a little baby that starts with a sketch of something on a smelly house, as you were saying, and transforming it into something that is really cool. And it's cool because it works in terms of the planning and the flow and everything, but it's also cool in terms of how it looks. And then obviously, besides all the technical, you have all the fluffy stuff, the cushions, the throws, the artwork, which is the fun part of it. So yeah, I really love that. I'm absolutely passionate about that. Even like the buy-to-lets that I work with, sometimes they're a bit more like buy-to-let types of things. It's just more planning and basic finishes, or they are like buy-to-lets that are essay types, and they're just absolutely fantastic with crazy color schemes. But the thing is, in terms of the market, it really separates them, and in terms of the rentals that they'll get is so much better. So yeah.
I love and hugely appreciate seeing incredible design, and I look at some of the stuff now in, I suppose, our social community and the HMO community, and some of the projects are incredible, and I can see how quick that standard is improving. If I look back just a couple of years, we're miles ahead. And I look at some people's stuff now and I'm really, really amazed. Yeah, it's jaw dropping. And I think that that's incredible for the industry. And I think particularly as, an industry that often gets tainted with that brush of slum landlords. I think there's a huge role to play there. But I think in terms of practicality and function and actual investment performance, people are really starting to take it much more seriously now. And I think people have to take it more seriously because there's too much competition not to. And one thing I want to ask you, because some people are still surprised when I say this, I don't do our designs. I have an idea, a broad idea of the standard I want to get our properties to, and that will vary depending on the budget, whether it's a big project, a small project, what the purchase price was, all sorts of stuff. But I'm not very good at design. I'm not good at pulling those ideas together and actually even delivering it. I'm often too busy or not skilled or capable enough to pull things together that are cohesive. I'll often make decisions that aren't very suitable in terms of, the practicality where things should be placed, which actually, when you're looking at an empty space, everything seems like it could work, and then actually when you put it in, it just isn't. And I've got a friend, and he's so good, when we're designing kitchens and you start putting furniture in and you start thinking about sockets and all of that stuff, he can see so far ahead, and that I find incredibly important. And actually, a couple of years ago, just realized that this was as important as hiring the right tradesman, having the right electrician to do certain things, using the right providers for furniture and stuff like that. And actually taking the responsibility away from myself, I wasn't able to do it as good as I could, and I give it to my friend now. And I think that our results in our business have really accelerated because of that. But what would you say to anybody who is thinking about maybe doing design and trying to do stuff themselves, but is struggling? Because I think this is becoming more mainstream. I think the idea of actually outsourcing design services to people like you is becoming more mainstream, and I think actually it's becoming more and more important. What do you think, Raquel, and what are you experiencing?
Well, it's funny that you say this because I normally have two types of investors that come to me. Ones that are like the first, second HMO, mostly the first, and they're like, how do I actually do this? Like, I had this whole expectations, and now it's like, oh my goodness, I have no idea. And they feel so overwhelmed that they're just blocked and they can't do it. Or I have investors that come to me and they're traumatized investors. They're like, I've done one or two, never again. This one goes well, or I'm like quitting. I'm doing something else. Stock market seems the best thing ever. And it's literally like that, because to me, and I see it from my business as well, I'm a creative person. So accounting, anything to do with that, I'm like, no, just no. So I outsource it because I know that there's someone that is going to be doing that so much quicker, so much easier. And then I can gain that time to invest on the things that I'm actually good at, and that's design. And that's the same that I say to investors. They should be looking at finding their deals, going to viewings, finding their private investors, and working towards growing the business, and then going to people like me or similar to me, so that we can then take their baby and make it absolutely amazing and work in all sorts of things, as you were saying, like putting the right furniture in, seeing if the sockets and the switches correlate, if the kitchen, you were talking about kitchens, and people they underestimate kitchens. But if you really think about like an 8-bed HMO, for instance, with 8 people at the same time in the kitchen doing things, it has to work.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, it has to work.
That's when people start to get frustrated.
Yeah.
And maybe only subconsciously, but you get higher churn rates, you get people getting frustrated with each other because someone else is using the oven or they can't get to the fridge, and it slowly creeps in. And I think you're so right there, actually. And I know from personal experience, when I've lived in houses when I was a bit younger and shared houses that just don't work, how frustrating it is. But I think that's a really, really great point.
Yeah, and one thing is that, not only it's about, I think it's not by making properties look nice, but tenants are more and more and more demanding. So they actually want to go back to a place where their life is easier because they have so much troubles at work, here, there, relationship, who knows? And they just want to go home and relax and chill and do their thing and don't be bothered about anything. And if, if you're in a place where you cannot plug your USB in the right thing and you have to go around furniture to access it, it's just like, it's annoying. And people, sooner or later, they leave. And then that's when investors come and say, oh, my properties don't work. I have huge voids or a high turnover of tenants, and then my maintenance costs are going up the roof. So, it's all of those little things that just build up, build up, build up. And it's when you definitely need to go and outsource the design of your property, but from day one, not delaying it.
I think we've all stayed in hotels, haven't we, where things just don't work. There's not a socket next to the bed, and it just drives you mad. Or the door doesn't quite open, or the wardrobe door hits another piece of furniture because it's all placed too closely. Nobody's really thought about how the furniture needs to work in the room.
Toilets, Andy, toilets as well.
Toilet.
Yes, toilets. When I first started working, I got frustrated because I was 3 months, I think it was, or 2 months designing toilets for a big casino. And when I got that, I was like, seriously? Toilets? I need to do like 30 toilets? And all of them designed differently, blah, blah, blah. But you learn so much because in the small spaces, it's where you actually get that human dimension into the space. And you then learn how to make the furniture work, the circulation work, the flow work, and everything.
I think I probably know the answer to this because I probably made all of these mistakes. But what common mistakes do you see investors making now? When people have come to you and have had problems or have kind of are pulling their hair out halfway through a project and just sort of saying, Raquel, can you help us sort this out? What sort of stuff are you seeing people do that's going to have negative impacts,
Yeah.
without actual some professional help and support?
I think it's mainly it's the overall planning. And when I say planning, it's not just about the room sizes and determine where the partitions go, but it's all the layers that come with it. It's your small power, so your sockets, your switches, the furniture, as you were saying, if it fits, there's certain investors that they insist in having rooms cramped with furniture, and that absolutely doesn't work at all. I also see lighting. It's something that people don't actually naturally consider, but lighting is so important because you need to be able to provide spaces where you have all your functional lighting, but also your kind of ambient lighting. So yeah, those are probably the main things. So I would say small power, lighting, planning, and furniture layouts. That's where it kind of hits. When you get all the furniture in and it doesn't fit, it's frustrating.
I've made all of those mistakes and many more, I'm sure. And I think one of the ones that I've realised over the years is just so important, and I never used to place any value on it. Was light, natural light, and actually
Yeah.
considering natural light sources, but also the other light sources in the house, how they work, where the lights are placed, and even just the simplest things. But I found that we were doing a lot of viewings in houses, and with the student lets, we're often doing those viewings around this time of the year. We're recording now, it's November, so by 5 o'clock it's pretty much dark. So a lot of the viewings we're doing are in the dark. A lot of our tenants will leave the blinds closed, which means the lights need to be on for viewings. And there isn't actually much natural light when we're often doing these viewings. And that can make places feel dingy, and particularly if you've got tenants who are living there and there's stuff around. And warm lights just have such a bad effect, where actually white lights we found made a big difference, and using different types of bulb sources and actually placing lights in different places made a huge difference. It was just that first impression on tenant viewing was totally different, rather than going around somewhere that felt a bit dark, a bit dingy, and it was
Yeah.
so simple to change and so cheap to change, but actually had such an impact when we started doing it. All of a sudden we were doing less viewings, which is a huge saving for us. Just going back to what we talked about earlier, Raquel, because I'm so interested in this. all of our projects are different, and I suppose depending on the number of rooms and things like that, we'll to some extent determine how profitable our projects are. But what do you think the real cost of not doing this is in today's market? What's the real cost of, I suppose, bad design, or maybe not even bad design, designs that just aren't as good as we're seeing now elsewhere in the market?
Yeah, sure. So, for instance, one of the properties that I'm working on, it's a 7-bed HMO. It's in the south, so it's not in the north, and there's a huge gap. But for instance, if I would compare this property and what we are targeting, which is about a 90% of occupancy rate, one that is not a similar property, no design at all, we are kind of looking into a 60 to 70% of occupancy rate, which if you think about like your gross income in, let's say, 5 years, it will be around 184 more or less in 5 years. Whereas if then you have design into this property and everything is done properly, you're looking into an uplift to 324. So it's like 130K of an uplift difference. And it's huge because it's about 36% of an uplift. And that can really, it's like amazing for an investor to have that. And also in terms of not only, sometimes people only think about the what you're getting in terms of your rent uplift, but also in terms of your end value when you go and refinance the property. So that also has a huge implication. And then if you go a bit more like northwest of the country, you're looking into more towards the 46% of uplift in your rental increase. So it is huge. And as I normally say to people, you have your power team, right? You have your solicitor, you have your mortgage broker, and you should have as well your interior designer, because it will make a difference on your deal and it will set your business to a completely different path.
I think when it's explained like that, it's really just simple business economics, isn't it? Invest a little bit more and think differently about the way that you design your properties, and you could get potentially between a 36 to 46% increase on your rent, plus the likelihood is you're going to get a better valuation on the property.
Yeah.
And then I expect as well, other things that will wash out would be, we touched on them, but reduced voids, reduced churn, and actually that's a huge cost saving there. I imagine when rooms do get turned over, it's doing viewings and filling them much more quickly, maybe doing them on the first viewing as opposed to doing 2 or 3, which again is a massive cost saving exercise. And actually, as well as the physical costs, I think there are very sort of tangible other costs to landlords and investors. Just giving the headspace to this, throughout the year, filling rooms, it takes time and effort and thought. There's logistics to be considered. You've got to give access to notifications, and you've got to put adverts up and online, and that whole process actually is the sort of stuff that landlords don't want to do. We don't want to do that. What we want is people to move in and just stay there for forever.
Forever and ever.
Now that would obviously be a fairy tale and unrealistic, but I think there's a way to manage it, and I think if you look at the sliding scale here, there's lots of things that do contribute to voids and stuff like that, but this is one of the ways where we can definitely reduce the voids, reduce the churn, make people much more likely to sign up quickly, saves us loads of time, saves us loads of money, and actually just makes us happier landlords, which I think's got to be that's got to be the purpose, hasn't it? There's no point having an asset that stresses us out, and we're always thinking about. And I think that's one of the big risks with HMOs, and we don't talk about it enough. And we kind of venture off the commercial bit, which is so important. But actually, there's this very practical bit of, it's just good to have a house that just works, that
Exactly.
doesn't give you problems. Do you find that as well? Once people have got them and they're up and running, they're just easier to run because they're set up better in the first place.
Yes, I guess it's about also, tenants' expectations nowadays are completely different than where they were 5 years ago. And you do see, and the same as how properties look, 5 years ago it was one thing, now it's completely different. And what I normally say, it's a bit like a luxury living, but on a kind of, developer's budget. And that's exactly what you need to provide to people in order for them to stay. So, the little hacks, like how we were saying about, the USB just being super accessible, that's like non-negotiable. It's just non-negotiable. It has to happen. And other things like that. I have several investors that they actually, for instance, like to provide tea stations on every single room, because they just feel that it's a little extra that they have. And, you can have biscuits and stuff like that for your tenants. And it's something that it's just a nice gesture, and people appreciate over the time. They just want to stay there, as you say.
Yeah. One thing that I think is really relevant here, particularly in the student market, because that's another area where tenants' expectations have risen, incredibly fast, and they're at an incredibly high level now, and it is often really difficult to manage those expectations, and I think that's become the biggest challenge. It's not the maintenance, it's not resolving, the roof that's leaking. Actually, that stuff's pretty easy to do, but it is managing the broad expectations of tenants, and particularly our student tenants who want things on demand. They expect an immediate message back, and it's because they are accustomed to it. And it's not just that they get that from their friends, but actually they get that from pretty much anywhere now. If you want to go on Deliveroo, you can chat straight away to somebody if there's an issue with your order. There are so many examples of people being able to talk to somebody immediately and get an immediate response because they're a customer. And actually, we're behind on that in our industry, and I think we will have to get better at that as well. I don't know what the answer is out of hours yet. We're getting better in the day, during business hours. But one of the things we're seeing is this is happening because the PBSA, the purpose-built student blocks, the big tower blocks, which are incredible, and there are hundreds of them being built across the UK. Some of them housing thousands of tenants, huge multi-million pound budgets. They are setting these new standards, and we're often talking about, and I get asked this all the time, are these blocks a risk to the student market, to my student property? And I've always adamantly said no, that they're not. They're a different product, and I still believe that. But what is happening is they are feeding tenants to us in the private rental sector with much higher expectations, and at the same time a taste for better quality accommodation. The bridge between where accommodation was 5 years in the PRS and where accommodation is in the PRS now, which I would describe as a platinum standard, it is just too big, and that's why some landlords are struggling and not able to cope. But we're finding that we're able to put rents up because they're coming from accommodation where they've been paying 170, 180, £200 a week. But at the same time, they expect more for that. They expect standards to be much higher. They expect our standards to be much higher as well. So, I think looking at the size of the student market as well, and I think this is really interesting. This is quite natural, this conversation for us. You're a designer. I really appreciate design, and we've started to do more and more of this in our community. And we've got tons of amazing case studies in the roadmap, and we're seeing this already. That's normal, but actually, for the majority of the HMOs in the market, which are still the student-lets, this conversation is so left field. This just isn't even on the radar to so many people. Do you think that this is where the direction of the private rental sector? Do you see that standards are going to keep driving this way, and people are going to have to do it? What do you think, Raquel?
Yeah, I think so. I think that if you're a landlord that you think that you can cut corners and just provide, bad quality furniture, bad room layouts, cramped spaces, or no communal spaces at all, and it's everything going to be okay, you're so wrong. Because people's expectations, it's as you were saying, it's like the Deliveroo. They want it here, they want it now. If they have a problem, it has to be solved in the next 2 hours. Otherwise, world will fall apart. And the same applies to design. So everything needs to work, as I was saying previously, to make people's life so easy that they don't even think that there's a problem. And that's it. It's about how a property looks, how a property feels, how a property works. And if you continue to deviate from this, you're literally going to have properties empty because no one wants to live there and no one will pay the rents that those landlords are expecting. It's not happening.
That's right, and that's what we're seeing, and some landlords fall off the cycle,
Yeah.
and that's a big problem for them. And either they've got to get their act together, or they'll sell the property, and it'll be picked up by somebody who's listening to the podcast today, who appreciates that, and we'll do that, and we'll refurb it and bring that smelly old house back to life, but we'll bring it to where it needs to be, where the market is almost commanding that it needs to be now.
Yeah, and sometimes it's very difficult to have that conversation with landlords, especially some of the landlords that are a bit more old school and they have, oh, I've always done this way. And trying to convince them, yes, you've done that way, but it doesn't work with today's market or today's expectations. And actually, you need to get your property literally back to brick, start again, clean slate, and do it properly. And, sometimes there are a few that they're like, okay, let's do this. But then there's some that they don't.
There are. And I've spoken over the years to so many of them who don't get it and don't see the value in it. And of course, they are the landlords who are having disasters with tenants not paying their rents, not filling the properties, doing viewings after viewings after viewings, spending more and more money, trying to upkeep, trying to patch here and there. And that is just the worst way to run a portfolio as a landlord. And, I would just hate to ever be in that position where I was sort of constantly clouded by issues like that, which actually... And yes, it might need some money to spend, but can be resolved by changing an expectation and actually just actively doing something about it. We're seeing so many examples of how it can be done now, and actually it can be done quite cost efficiently. And certainly, it's from a business point of view the right thing to do. If we know that it can make us between 30 and 40, 50% more in our rents, and there are other benefits, then it seems so obvious. But some people won't be convinced. But I'm sure a lot of people listening to today's podcast absolutely will be. I've got one more question that I want to ask you, Raquel, but I want to save it right to the end.
Okay.
But before we hit record, we were having a nice chat, weren't we? And I was asking how things were in the business and stuff like that. And you work full time. You have a kind of a full time role as well as running Mardesign. And you told me sort of about what you're doing at the minute and building the business, and it really resonated with me. And I think while it's not specific to design, I think we should talk about it because I think it's so great to hear someone else say it. So you started building Mardesign in March, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you got vision to really build that business, but at the minute, how are you juggling it?
So I sometimes, people say to me, I don't know how you do it, but I'm like, well, you need to be super structured because basically what I do is that I wake up every day at 4:30. On Saturdays or Sundays, I do the wild thing of waking up at 5. Giving me the extra half an hour. And at 4:30, I do my meditation so it can set me towards the day and to achieve the goals that I want for the day. I also work on my vision. So I think about and I visualize what I want to be achieving in the long term so that I'm super focused on what I need to do. Then I do business work. And then there's a point where I'm actually a single mother. So I become a mother for like half an hour where I direct my daughter to do what she needs to do to get ready. Drop her in school, go to work. Normally I have business meetings around lunch hour. And then when I come back from work, then I do business as well, business meetings, or I do work. And then I do it all again. And obviously I sacrifice weekends. I think that in the last 10 months, 11 months, I had one weekend off that I was fully off. And it was amazing. And I was like, oh my God, I have so much time. I don't even know what to do with this. And even when I go on a holiday, it's a holiday that I still wake up at 4:30 and I do my business work so that then I can have quality time with my daughter and my family, and then go back to work. So it's a bit of juggling, it's a bit of sacrifice, but it's working towards my vision. And so far it's going really well. I'm very pleased with the clients that I have and the investors that I have, because they do respect this effort and the way that I do things, and because they're happy with the products that I also deliver. So it's kind of so far so good.
Well, absolutely no doubt. And by the way, if anyone's listening and hasn't seen Raquel's work, you've got to go and look at it. At the end of the show, we'll tell you how to go and check that stuff out. But it really is incredible, and the projects that you're doing and working on with other people are just amazing. It really is at another level. But there you go, dose of reality. 4:30 starts. Building a business is hard work, boys and girls. And yeah, it really resonated with me, because I did the same. Just sacrificed so much just to get to that position where I didn't have to sacrifice so much anymore. I suppose you've got to work hard enough to not work as hard in the future. So it was really nice hearing that from you, and I appreciate your honesty as well with it, Raquel, because a lot of people like to make out like it's all super easy, and certainly talking to you about design, the way that you talk about it and how passionate you are about it, it sounds easy for you, but obviously actually the realities of running a business and doing everything else and being a mom are the same for all of us, aren't they?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's, you're only human. And obviously there are times that I'm like, oh my God, and I doubt myself, but it's part of it. People say, it's like the cliche that everyone says, it's the journey now, but it is just working towards what you want in life. And that's how you see it. You need to sacrifice a little bit for the bigger stuff that it's coming. So
Well,
yeah.
I couldn't agree anymore. So I have one more question I want to ask you, and just a quick reminder for everyone listening. Cal's workshop is inside the HMO roadmap. It's incredible. It's an advanced sort of course, I suppose, on interior design. And but what I want is, just before you go today, are there a few top tips that you could share to our audience that would help them if they're either thinking about purchasing a project, a HMO, or maybe something else, and have interior design on their mind? What few tips would you share with them?
Well, I think, the first would be get someone like me or someone else in their team so that actually you get everything right from start. But if you're not doing that, get your planning sorted from day one. That's the key secret, the main secret to get everything else working in your property. Because if you have the right planning, then all the other layers of design fall into place. So let's say your furniture, the small powers, your lighting, and then going into the fun stuff, the furniture selection, seeing if that works with the furniture layout that you have. Then, for instance, your soft finishes, so like your rugs, your cushions, your throws, because even using things like that and using and balancing with your hard finishes, so like your tiles, your floors, your paints, it will give more like acoustic properties to your to the spaces, or adding textures. There's a lot of things that having textures on a property gives that sensorial touch that people absolutely love, and it just makes everything more cozy, more warm, more welcoming as well. So yeah, so layering design, getting planning right from day one.
What a great tip. Well, I mean, for me, that just made me realize why it is so important to give this task to somebody like you, because you clearly know what you're talking about and how to deliver projects that look right, that perform right. So for all of our listeners, again, Raquel has got a very special, an exclusive discount available to our members of the roadmap. But for anyone who's not a member, that should be a member, Raquel, but isn't, what is the best way to contact you? How should they reach out?
Yeah, they can reach out on Instagram or on Facebook. and it's Mardesign UK, or just go to my website, which is mar/design.co.uk. And just drop a message, and I'm happy to discuss anything, or even just to have a chat and get to know more people.
There you go, guys. So make sure you go and check out Kel's stuff. And if you are thinking about buying your next HMO or struggling with a current project and feel like you need some support with your design, then look no further, because Raquel can definitely help you. Raquel, it's been an absolute pleasure to get you on the show. I'm so glad that you came and joined me today. It's been so fascinating talking to you and learning so much more about interior design. You've completely, for 10, 12 years, I've been doing this and developing properties, and you've completely opened my eyes to the technicalities behind it and actually how commercially it makes so much more sense to prioritize this. Because design for me was always one of those things that got thought about right at the end, and we used whatever was left in the budget, which we all know finds a way of just disappearing in front of our eyes. So thank you for enlightening me. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and also thank you for the opportunity to develop the workshops. It was really good, and I hope that people also find it very useful for them. So thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you, Raquel.